Howdy. My name is CDQuake. My UHID is 2250692, and this is my NAE final individual video. Our NAE challenge was to focus on a way to provide access to clean water. Our group's overall research question was to learn what current technologies will provide clean water most effectively. And my specific field is to discuss how effective chemical treatment is in handling certain facets in the water and how effective it is at purifying the water. With that being said, I will now take us to the MATLAB App Designer. And as you can see, this is the homepage of our app. I actually designed this for the group. The code is simple. I like to keep my code really simplistic, very user-friendly database. You can see our interface. You can see, let's say the pollutants and water usage button is pushed, that one there. It will open up one of my group apps, and it will close out the current app. To demonstrate this, I will go ahead and press run. As you can see, it launches the app over break. And it works with all of my code. As you can see, this one is done by Preston. The different keys in his app works the way it should. Wonderfully. Beautiful. Excellent. Press the return home button. And the return the app and bring back the home. Good. We'll now go to my app, the water via chemical treatment. And here's my app. It's got an axis, it's got the label. I've got a sort data, I've got a button, I've got a drop-down menu, I have a text area, a checkbox, and then another button to return to the home. If I were to choose one of these facets, say the solids, boom, it plots all of the data sets for my solids within my data set. There are 3,276 solids. See, it displays information about the chosen facet, that being solids. I press the sort data button, and you can see it gives a very nice, easy, and manageable viewing curve. The solids, I can press the show a purification. And what this does is it shows how the solids are affected once it's through chemical treatment. This is the approved standard for how high solids should be. And you can see that roughly equivalent 85% of it is reduced. And it's reduced down here to this new curve. And yeah, I can unclick the location plot, and that will turn off blue line. My computer is running a little slow today. I apologize. There we go. Wonderful. And yeah, so with that, I will now close out this app and show my app's individual code. Again, very simplistic design view. I try to keep it relatively user-friendly. We will now view the code. I have the properties. I'm basically just initializing these variables. That way I can access them easily throughout the rest of my code. I've got my data. I've got the 10 different facets that I will be looking into using this app. I have X, which will be the length of a vector, or the X will be a vector, which I will use as my X-axis for my graph. And then, of course, the user selection from the dropdown. Most of this code revolves around the dropdown menu. So this is sort data. So we will come back to this. Here is my down value change, because this is the first thing that the users will deal with. I'm initializing my data. Here you can see, I'll come back to this shortly. I use the if function because I feel like it gives me the most control. Very easy for me to handle. And so what this is doing, this if statement, it's going to look at what user chose as their value within the drop-down menu. So let's say the user chooses pH. It will clear what is currently on the graph. It will scatter the data on the axis. The x-axis, of course, is my x vector. The pH, my y is my pH vector, and this, of course, is just customizing size 20 dot. It's filled and it's black. Turn on hold in case the user wants something. I then use this line of code. I turn off my purification checkbox. I turn that off. That way, it makes it manageable for the user. That way, they don't have to do it themselves. And then, of course, this is just keeping my title, my X label, and my Y label. I change those with every time the drop down is changed. This answer variable here, what this does is this is a giant text array. And what I do is then I put my text area. So then I just write this all out as my variable. And then the text area value is equal to my answer variable there. Then I have an else if statement. That way, if the user selection is not pH, MATLAB will then look to see, okay, well, is it hardness? And if it is hardness, it's going to do essentially the same thing. And if it's not, it'll look to see if it was chosen to be solids, and if not, and it goes all the way down. And that's essentially it. Let's say they push the sort data button. Again, up here, I initialize all of my data, make sure that it runs the way I want it to. I don't want any errors or mishaps happening. It happened a couple of times while I was working on it. So I figured if I initialize the data at the start of every line of every function or callback, and I haven't had issues with it since. Again, it's another if else if stack. Looks to see what the drop-down value is. If the drop-down value is pH, I then create a sorted variable, and I use the sort function, and it will sort my vector, all 3,276 of them, and it sorts them from lowest to highest. I then clear what is currently on axis, and then I scatter up this new sorted vector, this new sorted vector, which is how I get that nice curve. Again, it looks to see what my current, whatever the current chosen drop-down value is, and that's how it runs. If we scroll back down here, this is my purification plot checkbox. Again, initializing the data. When the checkbox checked, the value equals 1. When it is left unchecked, the value equals 0, which is why up here in this code, I have it equal 0. That way it automatically checks the checkbox. And then if the value is 1, it then looks to see what selection is. So it's that if block, that if chain. I turn on hold to make sure that what is currently on the axis isn't changed. For instance, with the pH, are two blue lines that show where the effective range of pH is handled within chemical treatment. And so those two lines are at 5.5 and 8.5, and those are displayed on the graph behind the plot. And then again, just more keeping title, label, and then it does it again for each of my different facets. For most of these, so like hardness is typically reduced by about 50%. And so all I did was I had it multiply my hardness vector. I had those values multiplied by one hardness, whatever value it was reduced by. So if I were to go down to, let's say, chloramines here, course by 95%. So I have all those values multiplied by 0.05, and then I plot that. Here in solids, I actually had to use polyfit because I found that solid reduced by a relatively simplistic function, that being x cubed plus x squared plus x plus b. Use the polyfit to find my coefficients. I stored those in a vector. I set each of my variables, the x3, one that will be used to be cubed, had that set to coefficient. Indexed from the first value of the coefficient vector, again for x2, x1, and b, plotted out this equation. You can see I then plot here my is the dotted blue line that is used to show where the acceptable value is. And then, of course, you can see the solids are also dealt with here. And that runs through this entire nested if state. I end both. And then I have if the value equals, all it does is it sorts the data, again, kind of like the sort data button. It clears the axis and then plots up the sorted data and nothing else. That way it removes the blue data from the graph. And then, of course, the return home button, and all that does is it sends me back to my home app and closes the current app. So relatively code, but simplistic. I fell over it, very easy to manage and look at. I have each of them separated in nice spaces. That way I can tell where they are and what does what. Yeah. And so with that, I will conclude that my tab definitely explains or presents effectively what facets within the water are dealt with and how effectively they're dealt with. I will say I wasn't impressed with how effective it was in handling pH, but in the long run, I feel very confident with what I asked. So with that, I will close. I will stop screen sharing. And I wanted to say thank you for an amazing semester. I really enjoyed your class. I learned a lot. And yeah, thank you and good night.